look at the Big 12, I think a couple of years ago they decided they wanted to kind of slow it down a little bit, and Oklahoma didn't put up his big numbers. I mean, Jalen Hurts, we know the story about him, come from Alabama. And I think that when I went back to watch Oklahoma a couple of years ago when they were playing Houston, it was the first time they had like the first drive, or I think consecutive drives that had 3 and outs. And I'm like, are you serious? Considering, Oklahoma used to be a defensive school. And so it's gotten away from that. And I think it's something that has gotten out of hand, and I think that they've really sacrificed that side of the football because they want to go out and get the Baker Mayfields. They want to get out the Kyler Murrays. They want to go out and get these 5-star offensive players, and yet defensively, those guys aren't around. And if you're not going to get those guys, get the guys that are the 2-star, 3-star. It doesn't really matter as long as they can play. Then you got to develop them. And I think that they've really missed their mark on that. And I just look, when I was coming out of college, I was highly rated, and I'm thinking if I was a defensive player and I really wanted to go somewhere and really play defense, it probably wouldn't be in the Big 12. If I had a chance to go outside the Big 12 and go in the SEC, say Alabama or a team like that plays defense, that's probably where I'd go. And to me, they're really missing out on that because it's not all about offense. And to your point about going into the playoffs, and we see these offenses and defenses, what they do in the playoffs. I mean, look at the Super Bowl. Look at Tampa Bay and Kansas City. Mm-hmm. I mean, you got to lock down on defense. You got to shut some of those possessions down. And when Oklahoma gets to where they really need to press and stop people, they're not acclimated to it. They don't have the reps to do it. And I think sometimes that really, really is the issue with them going another step further.
Well, you said enough about Spencer Rattler, so we don't really have to get into much of him because you said.
Oh, when he takes his helmet off every play.
Yeah,
look at me.
Yeah,
you don't like that?
I can't stand it, man. I can't stand when he was, he was in high school. He was getting touted, and he was going on all those ESPN shows, and he would walk around the school like he owned everything. I don't like kids like that. But that's the way these
kids are now.
I can't stand it. I can't stand it.
To me, and I like your younger generation kid,
mm-hmm.
and man,
I'm not that. Hold on, I'm 38 years old. I'm getting up there.
Compared to me, I mean, I'm just both. You understand?
Yes,
you know how
course,
the platform is, and the social media, and mm-hmm. how many followers. I get that. And it's the perspective, and it's the branding that all these other schools, Oklahoma, the Oklahomas, the Alabamas. I mean, they feed that. Mm-hmm. They feed that monster, and we fall for it. And so, to me, it's just really it's fascinating to see where the athlete is today when it comes to social media.
Tony, let's get into your career as an NFL player. Obviously, if you don't know, Tony was drafted right behind Bo Jackson. He was the second pick in 1986. He went and now he goes to the Cowboys and he wins 2 Super Bowls. What is it like playing for Jimmy Johnson? What is it like being a part of that dynasty of the Dallas Cowboys?
Well, when I was drafted by a team, and it's like, be careful what you wish for. Yeah, you want to be highly drafted, but your chances the higher you go in a draft, that team is going to suck, okay? You're going to get paid and you get slotted, and if you're a quarterback, yeah, you're going to be franchise guys, but there's going to be growing pains. And so Atlanta at the time, we were horrible. And it wasn't under leadership and the ownership. It wasn't like Arthur Blank, who owns the Falcons now. And they've been to Super Bowl since he's on the team. It was just really, we were winning games was not a priority. It was the bottom line. And so when I went to Dallas, it was amazing because, when I grew up, I liked watching the Cowboys. I love Randy White. I love their defensive players, Roger Staubach. I mean, all the players that played, back in the day. And so I didn't really think about, if I get drafted, I want to play for the Cowboys because at that time, I was just glad I was going to get drafted and just so happened it was a second player pick. But when I left Atlanta, I remember, I hated training camp. When we had training camp, it was dog eat world, man. It was 105 degree. We just, beat the hell out of each other and everything. So I remember when I got traded to Dallas and we had training camp in Austin and it was 105 degrees. And when I landed there was all this mass media it's kind of like living in New York, with the media, and there was just so much media, and I'm like, wow, what is this? And if you remember, you go back, Dallas wasn't that good. In 80, 90, they missed the playoffs, I think. Atlanta beat us we beat them in the last game of the season, I think. And so they haven't started this run as far as success. I remember going there, and then I'm thinking there was like 12,000 people watching practice at training camp. We had that many people at a game when I was in Atlanta, and I'm thinking, this is nuts. So it just elevated the energy. And sometimes change is good. And, really that just revitalized my career. Change in scenery and change in the place so there was a bit more better energy. And, all of a sudden you're right back to why you played the game of football. I mean, it was just to have fun and get paid. But, man, it was just amazing, the change and the vibe and just the attitude. And, of course, 91 went to the playoffs, and the rest is history. Back-to-back Super Bowls I never have dreamt of, man. It was just ridiculous.
So they actually went through in the 90s, after they won the 2 Super Bowls, a very shocking decision when Jimmy Johnson got fired by a then young Jerry Jones. And now a lot of Cowboys fans, they don't like Jerry Jones very much. But again, his ego wasn't as strong back then as it is now, obviously. So what was your reaction as a player at the time when that ended up being the case? They bring in Barry Switzer, who was actually your coach at Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And so I don't know did you go back there with him? I don't remember, because I know you had a stint with the Jets in between in the 94, 95 after that, and then you went back to Dallas.
By the way, I do remember you on the Jets.
Yeah. So what was that whole reaction like? Even the shock factor of them firing Johnson as well as he was doing, and also bringing in Switzer, who was your coach.
Yeah, you probably remember me playing for the Jets about as long as the New York Minute. It was, and that was another. Rich Kotite and Pete Carroll was the coach the first year, and then Dick Steinberg decided he was going to fire him. And but I always tell people I was very, very blessed. I was very lucky to be coached by 2 great leaders, and Coach Switzer he's like my second dad, and he'd be my lifeline call. If I ever had to call someone, I would call him. And the guy's 80-something years old, but he's got the mind of a 21-year-old. I mean, his photographic memory remembers everything. And then you have, to your point, Jimmy Johnson. I think people were shocked. I think that we saw the external part of the relationship of Jerry Jones and Jimmy, these couple of buddies that went to University of Arkansas. His buddy makes all this money. He's a billionaire and buys his team. And he hires them. And we didn't really see the internal effects of it. And I think it really came to a head when they were at the Senior Bowl. And, Jerry got drunk and, the bunch of coaches in the bar. And he told all the coaches in the bar that there was 500 other coaches could have did exactly what you did, that being Jimmy Johnson. And all of a sudden hell broke loose. And so we didn't see that. And, as you know, you have 2 egos like that, and you have ownership and you have general manager and head coach. I think the ownership is probably going to win that battle. But, I think everyone was pretty much shocked when it happened. I remember whenever I heard the news, I'm like, what? And then I was really shocked when Barry Switzer got the job. Coach Switzer wasn't doing it. He's laying on his couch. And, Jerry Jones calls him up. Hey, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm just chilling and having a glass of red wine. And said, well, how would you like to come down to Dallas and coach the Cowboys? I said, okay. And by the way, I'll pay you a couple mil to do it. I mean, what are you going to do? And then if I told you have a chance to win a Super Bowl or maybe multiple ones, I mean, I'm there. But, yeah, I think that the question was always, and I think you look at Tom Landry, you look at the history of how that happened, how that marriage broke up with the way Jerry fired, the royalty and Tom Landry. And then you saw what happened perpetuated between Jimmy Johnson and Jerry Jones and how that ended. I think everyone always a question was, what would have happened if Jimmy Johnson would have continued to be the GM and the head coach for another 3 or 4 years? Would we have been like the New England Patriots?
Absolutely.
We would have won 5 Super Bowls. We would have won 4 in a row. We'll never know. But I think a lot of people would kind of really like to just have wishful thinking and like, well, what would that have been like?
You mentioned Rich Kotite, who never got a job after getting that head coaching job for the New York Jets. And we had a guy named Adam Gase here, who will probably never get a job in the NFL again after Mr. Cuckoo Eyes screwed up a quarterback where everybody thought that he was the quarterback guru. So we look at your career and we look at some of the quarterbacks that you played with. Obviously, Troy Aikman, who's one of the greatest quarterbacks of our era, in the 90s era. So out of all the players that you played with, and you played with some really great players on those Cowboy teams, what player was the most impressive player to watch in practice and watching him on the field? And what player really stuck out to you as far as personality? Who was it? What really, and do you have a story behind it?
Well, I have a lot of stories. And that was so great about, and I think we always, as players back in that generation, when that was the rock star years of the Cowboys, are glad we didn't have these little things, these little cell phones back then, because there would have been some documented moments. But I'll start with, we had so many magnetic personalities on the team. You mentioned Troy Aikman. Troy, to me, I love Troy Aikman. I saw where he went and watched Deion Sanders, supported him for his first win. Unfortunately, someone decided they were going to steal all his personal belongings. Deion Sanders after the game, which finally I guess he got him back. But anyway, he went there to support the former player. And so that's kind of what Troy is. Troy, to me, I think you need quarterbacks that are humble, that are stoic in a good way, where that it's like, it reminds me a lot of, I always say the great quarterbacks are the quarterbacks that you want to play for. And like Tom Brady, I could see guys that's going out there and pouring their guts out for this dude, because he's doing everything that he's going to do to try to win and prepare. And that was like Troy. He had those leadership skills, and that's hard for a quarterback. I mean, you either have them, you're either born with them, or you're not. And you really need to. It really comes to the head when you're an NFL quarterback, because there's guys that are going to respond to you, and they're going to look for you for leadership that maybe you didn't have when you're in college, because it's all. The college football coach was the franchise player back then. The quarterback had leadership, but when you go to the NFL, so you had Troy, and then you go down the line. Certainly, you look at Michael Irvin. I mean, there's so many tremendous stories about him. We had so many great times, and Emmitt Smith was. You played with I played with 4 Hall of Famers: Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Charles Haley, and then obviously Michael Irvin. But it was just there was something going on all the time. I mean, because we were so good. And I hate people hate to hear this, but especially back in the 90s, that brand, that star, we were stars because we won. Now you got the team now that they haven't won anything, and yet they still live like that. And for me, it's kind of hard to, and a lot of other people, former players, like, okay, what part of this am I missing? You're living like you did something that's been freaking 25 years ago. None of you guys are even alive, but to your point about the players, I mean, we had guys that when times are bad would make things funny, where you're grinding would just kind of break up the monotony. We had guys like Nate Newton. We had Kevin Gogan, who would play so many pranks on different rookies, and I could go on forever and tell you about the different guys. But going and playing in the Super Bowls and being in Hollywood the first year, the first Super Bowl 27, we belonged out there because we were Hollywood. We were Hollywood in Texas, and we lived like that. We went on the road because, guys, every place we went, it's like people would show up at the hotel. We'd be in New York, and we're like, aren't you guys Giants fans? We knew they weren't the Jets fan back there, but aren't you guys cheering for the Giants? That's ridiculous. As you know, to think that Dallas Cowboy fans had that many, you go to the hotel on enemy territory, even in Philadelphia of all places. Think about that, even in Washington. Mm-hmm. We're like, you guys are going to get shot around here if you guys wear that Cowboy jersey. But, that was just kind of the magnetism that we had. And it's just because of just all the different personalities, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who got the credit. A lot of these guys now, it's like, I want the credit. I want to have 500 million followers. But we didn't care because you know what? the guy that got 25 million followers, the other guys behind him, but below him, are going to get 5 to 10 million. So, in essence, we all were in it together. And the best way to describe those teams was unselfishness. No one cared. It didn't matter because guess what? We're going to get ours.